God chosen owns. God just spoke. It's your appointed moment now. You weren't born late. You were born right on time for a divine assignment hell tried to delay. You've wondered why your life felt harder, why silence followed your prayers, why people walked away the moment you started to rise. But hear this. Your suffering wasn't random. It was refinement. And your birthday? It wasn't just a day. It was a prophetic timestamp, a signal to heaven that you were ready for activation. If you are God's chosen one, this message was written in heaven with your name on it. And today, heaven whispers, you are not late, you are next. No more morning distractions. No more overbooking her peace. No more being emotionally available to people who couldn't carry what was on her life. She started clearing physically and spiritually. She donated clothes that no longer aligned with who she was becoming. She deleted contacts from seasons that had expired. She let go of prophetic words spoken over her by people who didn't discern her spirit. Everything must match the assignment, she wrote. Not just her friends, not just her language, even her home. She printed the words "clarity is a choice" and taped them to her bathroom mirror. The distractions that masquerade as good. One night, she got a call. An old flame, one she had prayed over for years. The one who said, "If God gives me a sign, I'll come back." He sounded humble. He sounded ready. But Naomi didn't feel peace. Instead, she felt a weight. Not fear, not trauma, just resistance. "God," she whispered. "This is what I waited for, isn't it?" And he answered, "It's what you prayed for before you became who you are now." Her eyes filled with tears. She realized, some doors stay closed, not because they're cursed, but because you've changed. She let the call go to voicemail. That night, she dreamed of two roads, one lit by chandeliers and noise, the other, a narrow path, dimly lit but lined with oil lamps. She chose the second, and in that moment, clarity won again. When the voice speaks again. 3 weeks into her new rhythm, Naomi heard it. A voice, not audible but unmistakable. "Now that I have your attention, I'm about to show you the next 5 years." She gasped, not from fear, but awe, because the God who had been silent in the storm was now singing in the stillness. What he revealed wasn't all glamour. Some of it would be lonely. Some of it would cost her relationships. Some of it would look like too much to small minds. But all of it would be anointed. She wrote the vision, not as a to-do list, but as a scroll from heaven. Dates, themes, cities, chapters of a book. A retreat called The Reintroduced Woman. She wept as she wrote, "God, I don't feel ready." And he whispered, "You don't need to feel ready. You just need to stay aligned." The moment clarity became worship. One rainy evening, Naomi knelt in her prayer room again, but this time not for answers, for adoration. She lifted her hands and said, "Thank you for not giving me the answers when I demanded them. Thank you for protecting me from premature platforms. Thank you for guarding my gift from me." And in that holy moment, clarity became not just information. It became worship. The reversal of chaos. As clarity increased, the ripple effect began. Greater than her sleep deepened. Greater than her voice strengthened. Greater than her circle sharpened. She started receiving texts from people saying, "When you speak, it breaks something off of me. I don't know what changed, but I can feel your words now. Can you mentor me?" It wasn't just the message. It was the vibration of her clarity. Because when you stop living diluted, your life becomes magnetic. The strategy room. 1 month later, Naomi stood in a quiet co-working space. In front of her, a whiteboard filled with sticky notes, verses and timelines. On her laptop, a presentation deck titled Prophetic Strategy, Clarity After Chaos. She wasn't building a brand. She was birthing a movement, not from trauma, from truth. And the truth was simple. Clarity doesn't come when you beg for it. It comes when you become someone who can carry it. Naomi smiled, because the fog didn't lift when she fought the storm. It lifted when she surrendered to the stillness. Part 1. Marked before birth. A flashback to Naomi's childhood, in a small southern town. Dusty roads, quiet fields, and an old white chapel. She's just 7 years old, sitting alone on the school bus, staring out the window while other kids laugh behind her. Even when Naomi was little, she felt things other kids didn't. She didn't know what to call it, only that certain rooms made her spirit feel heavy, that some people smiled with their mouths, but lied with their eyes. She never fit in, not at school, not even at Sunday school. Other girls played dress-up. Naomi wrote prayers. While the other children giggled and chased each other on the playground, Naomi sat under the pecan tree, drawing angel wings in the dirt and asking God questions no 7-year-old should have to ask. Why did Daddy leave? Why did Mama cry at night? Why do I always feel watched? It was as if her spirit was born awake. But being awake in a world that's spiritually asleep is lonely. It's like carrying a light you don't know how to turn off, and that light makes others uncomfortable. One afternoon, after being teased again on the school bus for talking to angels, Naomi ran straight into her grandmother's arms. Why don't they like me, Grandma? Why do I feel so different? Grandma Ruth didn't rush to answer. She just held her tighter and whispered, "Because you are, baby. Because heaven marked you before the world ever met you." She opened her worn Bible and pointed to Jeremiah 1:5. "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart." And with trembling fingers, she pressed her hand to Naomi's chest, bathing. That ache inside you, that's not sadness. That's sacred. It's the call of the chosen. Tears rolled down Naomi's cheeks, not from fear, but recognition. Somewhere deep in her spirit, the words rang true. But being chosen didn't come with a crown. It came with loneliness. It came with bullies. It came with silent questions and spiritual sensitivity too heavy for her small shoulders. That night she curled under her covers and prayed for God to make her normal. But heaven had other plans. Because Naomi wasn't just born to be different. She was born to be set apart. She didn't know it then, but that ache she carried through childhood was actually the first sound of her assignment being born. And even though she was surrounded by silence, the angels were already standing guard. Part 2. Attacked in silence. Naomi's early 20s, a small-town church community and her modest apartment. The sun shines outside, but shadows grow inside. The people she once trusted begin to shift. By her 20s, Naomi had grown into her faith like an old soul in a young body. She was the kind of girl who stayed late to clean up after church, prayed for strangers in the grocery store, and never turned down a chance to help someone in need. People admired her, or so she thought. But behind the applause hid agenda. Her gifts had grown, sharper discernment, wisdom, spiritual insight. And some people didn't like how clearly she saw. Especially not Pastor Jordan, the man she once called her spiritual father. At first he praised her. "Naomi, you're going to do great things for God. I see an Esther mantle on you." But soon, his compliments turned into control. He didn't like when she asked hard questions. He discouraged her from leading prayer groups unless he approved. He told her to slow down, to be careful not to outshine others. And worst of all, her closest friend, Lisa, the one who once prayed beside her, started pulling away. Little by little, the community that once called her anointed began to label her rebellious. She hadn't changed. They had. But Naomi said nothing. She kept serving. He kept smiling. He kept praying, until the silence got so loud it broke her. One night, after being left off another leadership list again, Naomi fell to her knees in the middle of her apartment floor. No words, just sobs. "God, What did I do wrong? Why does it feel like everyone is turning on me? And in the stillness, God didn't answer with thunder. He answered with memory. She remembered Joseph, gifted, loyal, favored, yet thrown into a pit by his brothers. She remembered Jesus, sinless, selfless, betrayed with a kiss. And then she heard the Spirit whisper, "You're not being punished, you're being protected. You're not being rejected, you're being redirected." It didn't ease the pain, but it gave it purpose. Naomi realized she had been attacked in silence because she was spiritually dangerous, not to people, but to powers. And the enemy always attacks loudest. Right before the next level of your calling, she wasn't cast out. She was being called higher. And sometimes that elevation happens through isolation. So Naomi stopped trying to explain herself. She stopped shrinking to stay accepted. She stopped waiting for earthly permission to obey a heavenly calling.
Because when man shuts doors, God builds new ones. And even though the rejection wounded her, it was the womb where her next season was conceived.
Part 3. Buried, but not dead. Naomi's modest apartment, quiet, beige walls, a stack of unopened journals in the corner, and a bookshelf filled with devotionals she's too tired to read. Outside, the city pulses, but inside, stillness. Heavy stillness. Some things don't die when you bury them. Some things grow roots in the dark and wait. Naomi didn't know that yet. All she knew was that the fire she once carried, the prophetic spark, the voice that moved rooms and shook atmospheres, had gone quiet. She still believed in God, but she wasn't sure she believed in herself anymore. The betrayal at her church, the whispers, the exile from the community she gave her best years to, it all wore her down like a wave crashing against the same rock. Bake again, and again, and again, until something in her spirit cracked. And then, she just stopped. She stopped writing. She stopped dreaming. She stopped expecting anything different. "I'll just live quietly," she told herself. No more leadership. No more vision boards. No more trying to be anything special. It hurts too much. So she boxed up her journals, every one of them. Pages filled with dreams, words she once believed came straight from heaven. She put them in the corner, stacked like tombstones. And she got a normal job. The kind that didn't require discernment, passion, or purpose. The kind that paid the bills and kept her invisible. Her co-workers liked her. She was polite, reliable, predictable. And inside, she was dying. The quiet death of a calling. Naomi's apartment became her hiding place and her prison. Each night, she returned home to stillness. Not peace, just stillness. She'd scroll through social media, see people she once mentored preaching on stages, getting called into platforms she used to pray for, and a voice would whisper in her mind, "That could have been you. You missed it. You were never enough. God chose someone else." She didn't argue with the voice anymore. Arguing took energy, and all her energy had been used trying to stay afloat in a world that never seemed to make room for who she really was. So she buried it. She buried her voice. She buried her questions. She buried the spiritual gifts that once felt like wings. But even in her silence, heaven hadn't gone quiet. The 3:33 a.m. wake-up call. One night, Naomi fell asleep with her phone in her hand and the light still on. At exactly 3:33 a.m. she jolted awake. No sound, no dream, just presence. Heavy, holy, thick like oil in the air. She sat up slowly, breath caught in her throat, heart racing. The apartment felt different, almost like something or someone had stepped in. She looked around. Nothing moved. But something shifted. She checked her phone. 3:33, I am Omnia. A verse surfaced in her spirit, uninvited, yet unmistakable. "Call to me and I will answer you, and tell you great and unsearchable things you do not know." She hadn't read that scripture in years. Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them, because she knew this wasn't random. Something was waking up in her, and heaven was knocking. The dream of the child. She fell back asleep, and in that in-between place, not fully dreaming, not fully awake, Naomi saw herself. 7 years old again, under the old pecan tree, drawing angel wings in the dirt with a stick. The child version of her looked up and smiled. "Why did you stop writing?" she asked softly. Naomi swallowed. "I don't know," she whispered back. "It got hard." The little girl tilted her head. "But you promised me we'd tell our story." Naomi broke. She fell to her knees, sobbing, trying to apologize to the child inside her who had always believed. And then the child leaned in, wiped her tears with tiny hands and whispered, "Buried things grow, Naomi. You're not dead. You're just planted." The sprouting in the dark. Naomi woke up gasping, the kind of gasp that feels like resurrection. She sat on the edge of her bed, pulse pounding in her throat, and she heard it, not out loud, but undeniably. "Get up and write." She walked barefoot across the apartment, trembling. Her fingers opened the journal drawer before her mind could argue. Dust rose, the leather covers cracked. She picked one, the one with her name in gold, and for the first time in 3 years, she uncapped a pen. She didn't try to be prophetic. She didn't try to be poetic. She just wrote. Her in the story, her silence, her breakdown, her buried faith, the post that broke the algorithm. That night, she typed one paragraph from her journal and posted it on social media. Nothing fancy, just raw truth. For anyone who used to feel anointed and now just feels tired, you're not forgotten, you're just buried. And buried things bloom when the season shifts. She went to sleep expecting nothing, but heaven had other plans. By morning, her inbox was flooded. "This saved me. Didn't know anyone else felt this. I thought I was the only one." Pastors shared it. Counselors bookmarked it. Strangers called it prophetic healing. And Naomi just sat there still in her pajamas, holding her coffee with both hands, stunned. "God, is this you?" And she heard it again. "Your voice didn't die, it just matured." When dead things preach. The more Naomi wrote, the more her spirit came alive. Not to impress, not to be seen, but to tell the truth. And every time she did, more people gathered. It wasn't a pulpit. It wasn't a microphone. But it was sacred, because what once felt like a grave was actually a garden. Every rejection compost. Every silent night fertilizer. Every breakdown irrigation. God had used the darkness to deepen her roots. Now the roots were pushing up through the soil, and the bloom was coming fast. From buried to burning. Weeks passed. Naomi didn't try to build a brand. She just stayed, obedient. Then one morning, her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something told her to. A calm, commanding voice greeted her. "Naomi, I'm Elijah Monroe. I lead a women's revival ministry in Atlanta. A friend sent me your writing. We've been praying for someone like you. Would you come speak at our next gathering?" Her hand trembled. "Speak?" she asked. "Like publicly?" He chuckled. "Yes, you have oil on your words, but we believe your voice carries deliverance when spoken aloud." She didn't know what to say. She hadn't stood in front of a crowd since before the betrayal, but she remembered the voice from her dream, the child version of her, smiling through dirt and hope. "You promised we'd tell our story," and Naomi realized the story wasn't over. It was just beginning. On the night of the gathering, Naomi stood backstage in a modest black dress and no script. Just her journal and her scars. The lights were warm. The room full. She stepped up to the mic and froze until she heard it. "You're not buried anymore." She looked out at the women, all ages, some with tear-streaked faces, some clutching notebooks like lifelines. And she began, "I thought I was dead, but I wasn't. I was planted." Gasps, nods, one woman weeping in the front row. And as Naomi spoke, she felt it. The oil, the fire, the authority. What was buried had become bold. What was hidden had become holy. And what once felt like the end was actually the beginning of a divine reintroduction. As the crowd stood to their feet, hands lifted and voices weeping, Naomi stood still. Not because she was overwhelmed, but because she was finally at peace. Her pain had preached, her silence had sung, and her story had sparked something sacred in the room. Because buried things don't stay buried. Not when God is the gardener. And Naomi? She wasn't just back. She was blooming. Part 4. The birthday that wasn't random. June 14th, Naomi's 30th birthday. A quiet morning in her apartment. A single cupcake with a flickering candle. Stacks of unopened letters from birthdays past. A dusty box labeled Mum's Things sits untouched under her bed. Naomi had never liked birthdays. They reminded her of what hadn't happened. No surprise parties. No calls from her father. No milestones that felt like markers. Only memories that hurt more than healed. But this year felt different. The krikta crunches bit. The sipaks chana kamsel chrib ditcha. There was something electric in the air. Something that made her breath catch. Something that made her expectant, though she didn't know why. She sat at her kitchen table, her Bible open, a single candle flickering on a cupcake she bought for herself. A number heavy with meaning. Jesus was 30 when his ministry began. David was 30 when he became king. Joseph stood before Pharaoh at 30, not as a prisoner, but as a ruler. Naomi stared at the flame and whispered, "Is this the year my life finally begins?" No one answered, but deep inside her spirit, something stirred. The box beneath the bed. She hadn't touched it in years. Her mother's things. A collection of photos, handwritten notes, and a floral journal she was too afraid to open. The journal had been given to her by her aunt after her mother passed suddenly when Naomi was 18. "I think she meant this for you," the aunt had said gently. "She used to write on your birthdays." Naomi had shoved it under the bed. Until now. Something pulled her to it, not just curiosity, but divine compulsion. She got on her knees, pulled out the box, and opened it slowly. There it was. The journal. Burgundy with frayed corners and gold script on the cover. "For my Naomi." Her fingers trembled. She flipped through until she found an entry dated June 14th, 1993. Her 3rd birthday. Her mother had written in beautiful cursive, "She's not like the others. I feel it. When she laughs, the room changes. When she touches my face, I cry without knowing why. God, what did you place inside this little girl?" Naomi's eyes blurred with tears. She kept reading. Today she looked at the clouds and said, "Mama, the angels are painting. I don't know where she gets these things, but I do know this. Naomi was born for something more." Her hands dropped the journal as sobs overtook her. For years she thought she'd imagined her calling, that maybe she was chasing fantasy, that maybe she wasn't as anointed as she once believed. But her mother had seen it before she could even speak in full sentences. "God, you were speaking all along," she whispered. The devil whispered. The prophetic calendar. She looked back at the cupcake. The candle was still flickering, like a heartbeat. And then it hit her. Her birthday wasn't just sentimental. It was spiritual. She opened her Bible again and read Psalm 139:16. The days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be." Suddenly, her journaled prayers over the last few months didn't feel random. The 3:33 a.m. wake-ups. The sudden urges to write. The outpouring of messages from strangers calling her prophetic, restorative, anointed. They weren't coincidence. They were confirmation. Naomi sat down at her desk, opened a blank page, and wrote in all caps, "My birthday is not just a memory, it's a divine timestamp." Each year had felt empty, because heaven had been holding back this moment for this year. The wind shift. As she wrote, a breeze moved through the apartment. But no windows were open. Naomi froze. It was the same breeze she felt that night when she cried out, "God, did you forget about me?" But this time, it wasn't heavy. It was holy. A whisper rose in her spirit. Not with sound, but with certainty. You were born into time, for what is outside of time. Her birthday wasn't about growing older. It was about stepping into alignment. Like Jesus, who waited for 30 years before releasing his voice. Like David, who was anointed as a boy but activated as a man. Naomi felt the clock of heaven chiming. Not ticking. It wasn't countdown time. It was go time. The birthday vision. She closed her eyes. And suddenly, she was back under the pecan tree. The same vision from before. But this time, her younger self wasn't drawing in the dirt. She was holding a scroll. Naomi knelt before her inner child. "What's that?" she asked gently. The child smiled and handed it to her. "It's what was written about you. On the day you were born." Naomi unrolled the scroll slowly. Each line read like prophecy. "This one will carry fire in stillness. This one will awaken the weary. This one will preach with her life, not just her words." She looked up, tears streaming. "But I feel so behind." The child laughed sweetly. "You're not behind. You're just on heaven's clock." Naomi opened her eyes again, and everything looked different. Her kitchen, her books, even the flickering candle. Because she was different. Something had shifted, not outside her, inside. The message she almost didn't post. Later that evening, Naomi typed out her thoughts and almost deleted them. Too raw, she thought. Too mystical. But the Holy Spirit nudged her. "Post it. Someone needs to hear it." So she did. Today I turned 30, and for the first time I realized my birthday wasn't random. God waited for this year to activate the thing he planted in me before I was born. To anyone who feels behind, heaven's clock doesn't tick, it chimes. And today it rang. You're not late, you're just aligned. She pressed post and walked away. Within hours, it exploded. Pastors, prophets, mothers, artists, all commenting the same phrase. This is my word, the prophetic activation. That night, Naomi lit a candle beside her mother's journal. She whispered a prayer out loud. God, thank you for writing me into your calendar. Thank you for waiting until now. Because if you had called me earlier, I would have walked into purpose still bleeding from my wounds. But now, I'm whole, and I'm ready. As she blew out the candle, her phone vibrated. It was a message from Pastor Elijah. Your words today confirmed something we've been praying over our ministry. I believe your birthday wasn't just your activation. It's our alignment. Let's talk tomorrow. Naomi smiled, because now she didn't have to chase open doors. Open doors were chasing her, the birthday reborn. Naomi woke up the next morning different, not because of a viral post, but because of a quiet, undeniable truth. She hadn't missed her moment. Her moment had waited until she was ready to carry it. She stood at her window, sunlight warming her face. God, I finally get it, she whispered. You hid me because you had to heal me first. You held back the platform because you were building my roots. You delayed the recognition because you were developing my resilience. And you waited until today, because today is when I could carry it with grace. And somewhere in heaven a clock chimed again, because Naomi had finally stepped into the assignment she'd been born to fulfill. Part 5. The clarity after the chaos. A small prayer room inside Naomi's apartment. Walls lined with scriptures, candles flickering. Outside, thunder rumbles from a storm passing through. Inside, heaven is about to speak. Naomi had always assumed that when the chaos stopped, clarity would walk in like sunlight through parted clouds. But when the noise finally died down, when the betrayal, the heartbreak, the inner warfare faded into the rearview, what met her wasn't immediate clarity. It was stillness, and stillness to a weary soul can be terrifying. There were no more fires to put out, no more wounds bleeding in secret, no more fights to keep her faith above water. Now there was just silence. But it wasn't the silence of neglect. It was the silence of invitation. The clearing begins. She lit a candle that morning, a new habit. One flame, one whispered prayer. God, I'm listening. No more begging, no more bargaining, just openness. She sat on the hardwood floor of her tiny prayer room, a space she hadn't visited regularly since her wilderness season began. And for the first time in years, she didn't come with a request. She came to receive. The Holy Spirit began moving, not with goosebumps, not with lightning bolts, but with instruction. Turn off your phone. Pick up your pen. Start with what I said last, not what you want next. And in that moment, clarity began to bloom, not from new words, but from old ones. Naomi reached for the journal from her birthday. She read the last line she wrote the night before. You were born into time for what is outside of time. The sentence echoed through her ribs. Outside of time. That phrase haunted her, holy and heavy. The forgotten note. Tucked in the back of her journal was a sticky note, one she'd written almost 6 months ago. When chaos ends, clarity will come, but not from your mind, from your spirit. She had forgotten writing it, but now it glowed on the page. It was as if her future self had left her a breadcrumb in the wilderness. She whispered, "So this is what clarity feels like. It's not loud, it's light. Instructions, not explanations." We always ask God for explanations, but Naomi learned that morning, God doesn't explain, He instructs, and instruction is born in stillness. Write what I show you, not what you feel. She began writing 1 page, then 2, and 12. What emerged wasn't a sermon, it wasn't content, it was a strategy. Names, locations, even times of day. She wrote, wake early, 6:15 a.m. Walk daily. Fast once per week. Record your dreams. Don't respond to certain messages. Email Elijah by Friday. Prepare your first podcast, call it From the Pit to the Pulpit. She didn't try to understand it. She just obeyed. The enemy of clarity is clutter. Clarity didn't come because Naomi fought for it. It came because she cleared space for it. The cry that heaven didn't ignore. A quiet rural town in Tennessee. Evening breeze. Naomi sits on a creaking porch swing with a Bible on her lap and questions in her heart. She had prayed for years. Fast. Wait. Hope. Then nothing. No answers. No signs. Just silence. Naomi wasn't angry at God. She was just tired. Tired of trying. Tired of smiling while breaking inside. Tired of hearing people say your time is coming, when it felt like everyone else's had already arrived. She had done everything right. Stayed faithful, stayed quiet, stayed kind. But life hadn't been kind in return. Every time she got close to a breakthrough, something broke. A job loss, a betrayal, a phone call that changed everything. She looked up at the June sky and whispered, God, did you forget about me? The wind stirred, and suddenly, deep in her spirit, she felt it. Not a sound, but a shift. It wasn't loud, it was holy, as if heaven leaned in and whispered back, no, daughter, I didn't forget. I was preparing, and now, it's time. Tears welled up in Naomi's eyes, not from sorrow, but from the weight of finally being seen, because she wasn't just waiting on God. God had been waiting on her. And this moment, this exact day, this exact breath, was written long before she took her first step. Psalm 139:16 whispered from the pages, "How the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be." That's when Naomi knew. She wasn't late, she was next. And this was no longer just a waiting season. It was her awakening. Part 6. Divine Discernment Awakens. Naomi's home office. Soft worship music in the background, a candle burning on the windowsill, and a whiteboard filled with strategy. Outside, the sun begins to rise over the Tennessee hills. Inside, heaven whispers. Naomi used to think discernment was just a gut feeling, something you sensed when things didn't quite add up. But as her spirit matured, she realized discernment isn't just about what's wrong. It's about recognizing what looks right, but isn't God. Because not all open doors are divine. Some are distractions, perfectly packaged. Enter Caleb, the perfect distraction. He showed up at the coffee shop where Naomi worked on her ministry launch. Polite, handsome, spiritual language, fluent. He complimented her writing, said he felt led to sit near her, mentioned that his church was seeking prophetic voices to lead women in this next move of God. Naomi's flesh felt flattered, but her spirit tightened like a violin string. He spoke all the right words, even quoted scriptures, but something was off. When he asked for her number, Naomi hesitated, smiled politely, gave him her email instead. Play it safe, she told herself. It's probably just your nerves. But later that night, the Holy Spirit whispered. That wasn't a connection, that was a counterfeit. Discernment is a wall of fire. Naomi prayed hard that night. Not because of fear, but because she had tasted too much silence to ever invite another storm. She asked, God, why did I feel drawn and cautious at the same time? And the Spirit said, because you're growing. You're no longer swayed by surface. You're led by scent. That phrase hit her hard. Led by scent. Like how wolves can smell sickness. Like how prophets can sense corruption beneath charisma. Naomi was learning how to see in the spirit, not just the natural, the test of the almost right. 3 days later, Caleb emailed her a speaking offer. All expenses paid. Beautiful retreat center. A flyer already created with her face on it. She opened it, stared, felt the old ache rise. This is what I've been praying for. But again, the check in her spirit returned. Ask me first, the Lord said. So she did. And that night she had a dream. She stood on a stage, preaching. But as she spoke, her voice echoed back, twisted. The crowd applauded. But Naomi looked down and saw her feet sinking in mud. Then a voice boomed. It's the right platform with the wrong alignment. She woke up, trembling. Clarity. Sharp. Merciful. She declined the offer the next morning with grace, but with fire in her bones. I'm not moved by applause anymore, she told Camille. Camille smiled. Girl, that's discernment. That's oil. The gift becomes a weapon. From that moment, everything sharpened. Greater than conversations carried weight. Greater that she could feel motives before words were spoken. Was greater than she knew who to ignore without guilt. Greater than she knew when to wait and when to walk away. People she once trusted felt suddenly cloudy. Places she once loved felt spiritually dusty. She realized discernment isn't just for protection. It's for preservation of peace, of purpose, of purity. The loss that was liberation. One night, Naomi got a message from a former mentor, the same one who had once silenced her in church meetings. The same one who questioned her authority as a woman. He now wanted to reconnect. That he had seen her growth. Again that old ache rose, but so did the wisdom. Naomi didn't even need to pray about this one. Reconnection doesn't mean re-entry, she wrote. Then she whispered, discernment doesn't make you arrogant, it makes you accurate. And with that, she broke a soul tie she didn't even realize she still carried. When God whispers names. Weeks passed. Naomi began seeing faces in her dreams. Names written in cursive across her prayer journal. Impressions in worship. She started praying for people she hadn't met yet. One of them was a woman named Rael. She wrote her name down without context. Later that week, she received an email from a stranger. My name is Rael. I found your blog after searching for healing from church trauma. Do you offer mentorship? Tears welled in Naomi's eyes. God, you're training me, aren't you? Not just to preach, but to perceive. And in that moment, Naomi realized, discernment is not just for danger, it's for divine assignments. The whisper beneath the worship. It was 4:17 a.m. The house was silent. Worship music played gently from her speaker. Naomi sat in her prayer room again, eyes closed, hands lifted, and she heard it. You asked for clarity, but I gave you discernment. Because clarity answers what, but discernment answers who. And in this next season, who you walk with will determine where you land. She wept, because she finally understood. Her discernment wasn't making her lonely. It was making her safe. Not isolated, but insulated. Not rejected, but protected. Because elevation demands accuracy. When eyes open without fear. Naomi stood at her window again as the sun crept over the hills. She sipped her tea and smiled softly. Not because life was easy, but because she finally had what she had prayed for. On the platform, not applause, not a shortcut to success. She had sight, and with that sight she could now see greater than what was from God, greater than what was sent as bait, greater than what looked good but wasn't God. She whispered one final prayer. Lord, never let me trade being liked for being led. Let my eyes stay open and my heart stay pure. And heaven whispered back, you passed the test, and now your next level begins. Part 7. The Room She Didn't Expect. Downtown, Atlanta, Georgia. A women's prophetic gathering in a restored warehouse turned revival hall. Warm lighting, gospel music echoing through the rafters. Naomi stands backstage, moments from being introduced. Naomi never expected to be here. She had come to Atlanta with one bag, one journal, and no expectations, just obedience. Elijah Monroe's invitation felt divine, but Naomi still doubted herself as the Uber pulled into the cobblestone alley behind the revival venue. She stepped out, wrapped in a beige shawl and quiet fire. The warehouse looked like heaven, and history kissed. Rusty beams above, wooden floors below. But the spirit, it was thick. The kind of presence that didn't need music to make you weep. Inside, they had set up 300 folding chairs. All of them full. Women in head wraps. Women in blazers. Women holding babies and Bibles. They came to encounter God, and God had called her to speak. Backstage breakdown. Behind the curtain, Naomi clutched her notebook. Her hands shook. Not from fear of failure, but from the weight of what was happening. What if I'm not ready, she whispered. What if they see my scars? And heaven whispered back, that's exactly why I sent you. A word for Rael. Before she stepped onto stage, she saw her. Rael. From the email, from the dream. She was in the third row, head down, clutching a worn notebook. The spirit whispered again. She came for a word, but what she needs is a witness. Naomi didn't understand it yet, but she obeyed. The moment she took the mic. As they called her name, Naomi stepped into the spotlight. But it didn't feel like pressure. It felt like prophecy fulfilled. She wasn't standing in front of strangers. She was standing in front of assignments. And she opened with a whisper. I'm not here to impress you. I'm here because I almost didn't make it. Gasps. She shared the pit, the silence, the rejection, the death of her voice, and how God revived her in the quiet. Women sobbed. One by one they rose to their feet, not from hype, but from healing. And then her eyes locked with Rael's. Naomi didn't flinch. She spoke directly into her spirit. You thought God forgot, but he's been watching you cry at 2:17 a.m. You're not crazy. You're chosen. And this fire on your life? It won't be hidden anymore. Rael dropped her notebook and wept. The whole room erupted, not in noise, but in release. Chains were breaking. Scales were falling. Hearts were cracking open to glory. The altar that wasn't planned. Naomi hadn't planned to do an altar call, but the Spirit moved. She laid down the mic, walked down the steps. No ushers, no catchers, no hype. Just her, barefoot, tears running down her cheeks, placing her hands gently on women's heads. And each one fell forward, not backward, into their callings, into their freedom, into the arms of a God who never stopped watching. The full circle conversation. After the gathering, Pastor Elijah pulled Naomi aside. His eyes shined like someone who'd just watched prophecy manifest in real time. You weren't just effective, he said. You were electric, heaven-charged. You shifted the room. Naomi looked down. I was just obedient. He handed her a folded note. Then this is for you. She opened it later that night at the hotel. Inside were 2 sentences. For every room that once rejected you, God is now reserving rooms where your feet belong before your name is even spoken. This was the first, but it won't be the last. The confirmation email. The next morning, Naomi opened her inbox. Over 70 emails, all from women who were in the room. One subject line stood out. I'm still shaking. It was Rael. Inside the message. I didn't just get healed. I got commissioned. I walked into that room, a burdened believer. But I walked out, a burning one. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for not staying buried. Because your obedience just unlocked mine. Naomi sat back in bed, journal open on her lap. She smiled through tears. So this is what it means to carry oil. The room was never the point. Back home, Naomi stood in her prayer room. The same place where she once questioned if her voice was worth anything. Now, it had become a headquarters of heaven. She lit a candle and whispered, God, thank you for sending me into rooms I didn't expect. But more than that, thank you for making me a woman I didn't recognize 6 months ago. Not because I climbed a ladder, but because I laid it down. Not because I had answers, but because I waited in stillness. And not because I was good enough, but because you were God enough. The flame flickered like a bow, heaven approved, because the room was never the reward. Obedience was part 8. The oil that came from obedience. Naomi's quiet apartment on a rainy afternoon then transitions into a prayer retreat in the Appalachian Mountains, surrounded by pine trees, silence, and sacred assignments. Oil doesn't flow from ease. It flows from obedience. Naomi had heard that before, but now she lived it. After the Atlanta gathering, doors had begun to open. Opportunities she once begged God for were now begging for her. But she didn't rush. She knew elevation without instruction leads to exhaustion. And she had no interest in performing anymore. So she said no to platforms that didn't feel sacred, to collaborations that felt like compromise, to people who only saw her gifting but not her grace. God, she prayed, don't let me become famous where you never sent me. And heaven answered, with silence first, then an invitation, the letter from Sister Lenora, and it came in the mail, real paper, handwritten in blue ink. Dear Naomi, I've been praying. I don't know you, but your name came up in intercession. We're holding a private prayer retreat in the mountains. No stage, no spotlight, just stillness. Come if led. No fanfare, no pressure. Just a sense that something sacred was waiting. Naomi packed a small bag. No makeup, no ring light, no performance gear. Just a Bible, her journal, and a heart that had already learned. The oil isn't on the stage. It's in the stillness. Arrival at the mountain. The road twisted upward into the green hush of Tennessee hills. Rain danced on the windshield like a benediction. When she arrived, Sister Lenora greeted her with a hug that felt like a psalm. Welcome, Naomi. God's been saving this silence for you. There were 12 women there. Different races. Different stories. That same ache. Each had been stripped, tested, pruned, but still carried the scent of faith. Naomi didn't speak much the first day. She just listened. To the rain. To the word. To the women. To the still, small voice that had been guiding her since the pit. The oil press moment. On the third night, Sister Lenora led them into what she called the press. No music. No program. Just kneeling on wooden floors, face to the ground, and asking God, what are you still trying to crush so you can pour? Might discover their depths. Naomi trembled, her hands clenched, and then she heard it. Your desire to control, your fear of failure, your need to be needed. She wept, face down in the carpet. God, take it. All of it. Just let me carry your oil. And in that moment, he did. The anointing of silence. That night, Naomi couldn't sleep, though she walked into the prayer barn alone, lit one candle, sat in the middle of the room, and she felt it. Not chills, not shouting, but a warmth in her chest, like honey, like oil, like home. You asked for anointing, God whispered, but you didn't realize it's born in dying, dying to fear, dying to self, dying to ego. She opened her Bible, and it fell to Gethsemane, where Jesus said, "Not my will, but yours." Tears spilled onto the page. She finally understood. Obedience is where oil is born. Not in shouting, not in striving, not in being deep, but in saying, "Yes, Lord," when no one's watching. The anointed foot washing. On the final night, the women gathered in a circle. Sister Lenora carried a basin of warm water and a vial of frankincense oil. Tonight, she said, we anoint not for ministry but for movement. Each woman had her feet washed, not just with water, but with tears and fire. When Naomi's turn came, she knelt without resistance. Sister Lenora looked into her eyes and whispered, "This oil is expensive, because your obedience was rare. Many are gifted, few are yielded. You are yielded." As the oil ran over her ankles, Naomi felt something lift. Old residue, old striving, old shame, and what replaced it? Weight, but not heaviness, glory, the prayer that poured. Afterward, Naomi walked into the woods alone. She sat on a fallen log and whispered one prayer. God, don't ever let me substitute movement for miracles. Let me live slow enough to carry your oil. And God answered, you've been anointed, not for visibility, but for victory. Not to impress, but to intercede. And in that moment, Naomi felt it. The mantle, not a robe, not a title, but a responsibility to pour into others, to speak what costs, to obey without applause. And she said yes again. The oil follows her home. Back in her apartment days later, Naomi opened her suitcase. The clothes were wrinkled, the journal was full, but her spirit, weightless. She walked into her prayer room and smelled it faintly. Frankincense. Though she'd washed it off, it still lingered. Because real oil? It doesn't wash off. It marks you. It follows you. It says, this one paid the price. Naomi knelt again. No requests, just thanks. And heaven whispered, Now that you've carried obedience, get ready for overflow. Part 9. The overflow that found her. Late summer in Nashville, Tennessee, Naomi's apartment, then transitions to a bright co-working space downtown where doors begin to open, fast, wide, and supernatural. Overflow doesn't always make a sound. Sometimes it creeps in like morning sunlight, soft, steady, and undeniable. For Naomi, it began quietly. The first clue? Her refrigerator never went empty, even though her bank account said it should have. Then it was the emails. More people writing her for prayer, for wisdom, for counsel. And then, one day, out of nowhere, Camille messaged her. Naomi, someone asked for your number. A man named Jalen Rivers. He owns a few creative spaces in Nashville, says he's been watching your blog for months. Naomi blinked. Watching? Who even knew I was being seen? Camille replied. Apparently, heaven did. The invitation without effort. Later that day, Jalen emailed. Polite, brief, precise. Your words carry oil. We don't need another influencer. We need a voice. I've set aside an office suite for you. No cost. Just come see it. Naomi was stunned. She hadn't applied, hadn't asked, hadn't even dreamed of it. She whispered, God, are you doing this, or is this too good to be true? And the Spirit responded, this is what divine reward looks like. You didn't chase it, you obeyed into it. The space with her name on it. The building was sleek, modern, but not pretentious. Downtown Nashville pulsed with life outside. Inside, peace reigned. Jalen greeted her with a smile and led her down a hallway lined with windows. He stopped in front of a glass door. There was a plaque. It read, Naomi Grace, Kingdom Content Studio. Naomi's knees buckled. I didn't... she began. Jalen gently cut her off. You didn't have to. The Spirit told me, make room for the one who's about to release revival in word form. That's you. Tears filled her eyes. But I didn't even ask for this. Jalen placed the key in her hand. Exactly. The pouring begins. Within days, Naomi transformed the space. Bookshelves with prophetic journals, a recording mic for her podcast, a coffee corner with anointing oil instead of creamer. She began writing again, not just blogs, but blueprints, devotionals, mentorship curriculum, a series called Healed Women, Holy Fire. Each time she sat to create, the Spirit flowed like water through her hands. And the crazy part? It paid her. Without ads, without chasing clients. Donations flowed. Partnerships emerged. A stranger once PayPal'd her $5,000 with the caption, God said, fund her freedom. Naomi sobbed, not because of the money, but because of what it meant. God hadn't just seen her pain. He'd stored up provision for her post-obedience. The voice that multiplied. One afternoon, she checked her podcast stats. 10,000 downloads in 2 weeks. Then 100,000. People listening in Brazil, London, Nigeria, and small towns across the US with names she'd never heard. She opened an email from a woman in rural Kentucky. Your episode, Buried But Not Dead, saved my life. I had pills on the counter. Then I heard your voice, and I knew God still saw me. Naomi dropped her phone, fell to her knees, whispered into the carpet, This is why you crushed me. But someone else could live. Our overflow wouldn't just bless me, but break chains for others. The assignment she didn't see. 2 weeks later, Naomi got a call from a missionary in South Africa. We've been prayed for a prophetic voice to come, to teach, to anoint, to awaken, and your name came up. You don't know us. But heaven does. The flight was paid for, the itinerary cleared. She stared at her passport in wonder. God, how did we get here? And he whispered, faithfulness is a seed. but obedience is what waters it. The overflow wasn't the goal. Back in her studio, Naomi sat in the quiet. She thought about what had changed. No more begging, no more striving, no more trading purpose for performance. She had become someone who overflowed, not because she chased it, but because she made room for it. And now, her voice carried weight. The story carried oil. Her spirit carried peace. She was living in the promise of Amos 9:13. Things are going to happen so fast your head will swim. And her head was swimming, but her heart anchored, because the overflow didn't change her. Obedience had already formed her. The room was ready before she was. That night, Naomi stood in the window of her apartment. She looked out at the city lights blinking, buses rushing, hearts searching, and she whispered one final line into the quiet. God, I'm not asking for more. I'm asking to be trustworthy with what you've already poured. Heaven whispered back, no, that's why it found you. Part 10, The Legacy Born in Silence. Autumn in Tennessee. Naomi's home now filled with spiritual fruit, a bookshelf of testimonies, a prayer wall covered in names, and an invitation to speak at a seminary. The past returns in letters and voices, but this time, Naomi answers from a new place. Legacy. Legacy doesn't begin with fame. It begins with faithfulness in silence. That fall, Naomi found herself writing more letters than posts. Letters to women she mentored, notes slipped under doors at her prayer group, handwritten blessings mailed to strangers who'd reached out during their darkest nights. She no longer felt the pressure to be everywhere, because she had discovered being fully present in one assignment creates echoes across generations. The letter from a 16-year-old girl. One letter changed everything. It came in a pink envelope, scribbled handwriting, and a tear-stained corner. Dear Miss Naomi, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I was in the back of the room at your Atlanta gathering. You never saw me, but God did. That night, I gave my life back to Jesus. I threw away the pills. I started praying again. And now, I want to be like you, someone who helps other broken girls know they're chosen too. Her name was Maya. Naomi held that letter like it was scripture. The garden in Naomi's living room. A week later, Maya came over. Shy, quiet, wearing borrowed shoes and hope in her eyes. They didn't dive into theology. They baked cookies. He listened to worship, laughed until they cried. Naomi handed her a Bible. Inside the cover, to Maya, the next link in heaven's chain. Don't be perfect, just be present. He'll do the rest. That moment was small, but eternal, because Naomi knew legacy isn't loud. It's layered. It builds when no one claps. It grows in secret like mustard seeds. The spiritual daughters who found her. Word spread. Young women began showing up at Naomi's studio, not for content, but for communion. Women healing from church hurt. Women leaving toxic relationships. Women asking how to hear God for themselves. They didn't want a guru. They wanted a guide. And Naomi, having been silenced before, now used her voice to awaken theirs. She taught them the beauty of quiet, the power of small obediences, the difference between being seen and being sent, the seminary that remembered her. Then came the email. A seminary, the very one that once overlooked her, asked her to guest lecture. Topic: Legacy, Oil, and Obedience. She chuckled. God really does prepare a table. She accepted. But when she arrived, she didn't come to prove anything. She came to pour. The student sat stunned as she told her story. You want the oil? Be prepared to be pressed. You want legacy. Don't rush, let God write long chapters. And you want to be used? Then be ready to be hidden first. Tears. Silence. Reverence. Because real glory doesn't scream. It rests. a room of names and promises. Back home, Naomi's prayer wall had grown. Dozens of sticky notes, names of women she mentored, cities she dreamed of reaching, promises God had whispered in Gethsemane nights. She prayed over it daily, sometimes weeping, sometimes dancing, always listening. And one night, God whispered, "This wall will outlive you." Because legacy isn't about your name. It's about the fruit your silence produced. The book, the flame, the future. One morning, Naomi walked into her studio with a fresh journal. On the front, Volume 1, The Years Heaven Watched in Silence. Inside, she wrote the first line. "I thought I was being forgotten, that God was just building my legacy in a place where no applause could reach." She closed the book, lit her candle, and as the flame rose, she whispered, "I'm ready, not for more, but for what matters." Heaven leaned in. This is what obedience builds, the silence that built a legacy. Naomi was never after fame. She was after God. And what he gave her in return wasn't just restoration. It was reintroduction, not to the world, but to herself. The woman God always knew she could become. Through heartbreak, hiddenness, pruning, pressing, and finally pouring, she discovered, "I didn't lose time. I gained oil. I didn't miss my moment. I was being prepared to walk into it with my eyes wide open." What Naomi's journey teaches us. 1. Obedience unlocks overflow. Obedience unlocks overflow. God doesn't reward striving, he rewards surrender. Naomi didn't chase favor, she made room for it. 2. Hidden seasons are holy. What looks like delay is often divine design. God hides those he's preparing to use. 3. Discernment is protection. Naomi learnt to feel the difference between good and God, and it saved her from derailment. 4. Legacy is built in silence. The advantage lies in rebels, axes, and the loudest work God does is often the quietest. Seeds planted in hiddenness grow into trees of destiny. 5. Your yes is someone else's rescue. Because Naomi said yes, Maya lived. Because Naomi obeyed, doors opened for generations. Let heaven hear your yes. If this story stirred something in your spirit, if you've been walking through your own hidden season, wondering, "God, have you forgotten me?" this was your answer. He hasn't forgotten you. He is forming you. Now it's your move. Drop a comment below and complete this sentence. My obedience will unlock. Maybe it's healing. Maybe it's legacy. Maybe it's someone else's salvation. Whatever it is, say it out loud. Write it below. Declare it. Because heaven isn't waiting for you to be perfect. It's waiting for your yes. And if this message lit a fire in your soul, share it. Send it to someone in their silent season. Or sow into this journey if God leads, as a gift of obedience that funds more messages like this. Until next time, may your silence be sacred, your oil be holy, and your yes echo for generations. Your time is now.